Welcome back to Strategy Immersion Training. This is now officially the live stream for week 9, if I am right about this, fingers crossed. And as we've been working on here within Strategy Immersion Training, is we've been consistently diving even deeper into the work that we've been doing in Strategy Immersion Training because we just only have so much time to cover so much detail within the training sessions themselves. But more than that, because I mean, immersion trainings are about as deep a dive as you could possibly take. You know, we're covering like all the nooks and crannies, the extra little details that I feel that it would be helpful that you have as you go through strategy immersion training. So I do have a warning for those that are not in the mastery program. You haven't gone through strategy immersion training. We're going to be covering some extremely advanced concepts today. And so although some of it may make sense to you, some of it might be, it might cover or use some concepts or some jargon that you have not been trained in as of yet. So just you've been warned. Feel free to stick around. You're welcome to be here, of course. But MCU students and especially those of you that are going through strategy immersion training right now, everything I talk about, you should totally understand and know. So with that said, what we're going to cover today, there's two different ways I want to speak to this. One way is kind of an uber simple application of it, and the other one is a lot more of a seemingly advanced aspect of what we're going to cover. So I want to start with this kind of question that I wrote down here. Didn't put a question mark, but it's this idea of, are you stuck or are you in a spiral? Stuck or spiral is, I guess, the shorthand for that. But think about this from a perspective of the clients that we work with. So, you know, when we work with a client, you know, half the time they'll say something about how they're stuck or how they can't get anywhere, they can't go to the next level, or they keep having the same problem over and over and over again. You know, this is fairly typical that eventually, if you go deep enough with a client, that these kind of themes come up. And the question I would have, this is for the way you might think about where your client's at when they're talking about how stuck they are, or where you think you might be at when you actually feel stuck or you think you're stuck. And that is, are you stuck or are you just in a spiral? Because being stuck, the metaphor of being stuck, think of it like, you know, I'm glued to something, you know, like I'm physically stuck. Very seldom when we say we're stuck, are we actually stuck? We're using that metaphorically to try to help someone else understand our like subjective experience, right? And so think, now spiral doesn't probably describe your experience either perfectly on a physical plane of existence, but this is what I'd like you to consider, that when you or your client is stuck, they're not stuck, they're just in a spiral, and they're in a spiral where they're going back and forth between several different things. We're going to cover what that looks like in a second. I'm actually going to give you the model of this. And so as a result, they think that they're stuck. It's like, it's a head fake because we're not really getting anywhere. And yet the fact is, I would postulate, my thesis is that you're actually spiraling. You or your client are spiraling in a particular direction. And I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like in a second. Hey, Travis, long time no speak. Welcome to the training. Anyway, so now another way, this is maybe a little bit more esoteric way to describe it, is what I actually put on the label for this particular live stream, this idea of waking up. Now, people talk about this a lot, right? I mean, you see it on social media, you know, on a regular basis. Somebody says, "You guys don't know what's going on here. Wake up," right? And it's usually something around politics or something somebody's frustrated about, how people are all sheep or something like that. But I think this really has application beyond just the way that we might denigrate our fellow human beings of being at a lower level of consciousness, and that is that there are places where our clients are not fully conscious, let's say, right? And by the way, that's the same with you and I, right? We all are in 99% of our existence not totally clear, not totally conscious, not totally aware of everything. But more specifically, you think about waking up like, okay, not that I'm waking up to the experience of my, how my big toe feels right now. That's not exactly like a wake up experience. Anybody can pay attention to that, right? That doesn't take any wisdom on our part, right? But consider that some clients that you'll work with, in fact, almost all clients that you're working with, including you and I, are asleep in a variety of ways, and that if those parts of us were to wake up, very select and specific aspects of us, and I'm going to share what those look like and what those are in just a few minutes, that we will actually, there'll be a part of us that comes awake. There'll be a part of us that is now aware at a level that puts us way beyond where we were before. Okay, that's why I call this waking up. And then the fancy way of saying this is coaching your client through levels of consciousness using spiral dynamics. So we're going to talk about what spiral dynamics is, and I'm going to show you these levels of consciousness. The way that these two kind of memes might relate is that, like if you're at a particular level of consciousness and then you awaken, if you will, to the next level, right? Suddenly you're aware of what's available at that next level, and you spiral up, so to speak, to another level of consciousness. Does that make sense? So I know there's a lot of little angles on this idea, but people that are stuck are in a spiral where they are unconscious of another level that's available to them, so to speak. And rather than thinking, okay, I have got nowhere to go because my feet are stuck to the floor, or stuck to the ground, I'm stuck to my desk. It's more like I can spiral up to that next level, awaken to that next level of that next level of consciousness, and that is what we call spiral dynamics. Another way of saying it. So this technology was developed, I believe, originally by Claire Graves. If you're familiar with the Graves' work. A lot of people have kind of stolen these concepts and applied it in their own work, in their own in their own treatments of this technology. Ken Wilber is one. My original mentor, Tony Robbins, is one, and they all kind of come back to what I'm about to share with you in this live stream here. So I'm going to start, though, with something that I think, it's not necessarily a universal experience, but I think it's something that you will recognize. Have you ever experienced or seen someone experience, even if they weren't like right there, but it was like you saw it on a movie or in a kind of a play or something? Have you ever seen somebody go through like a mental breakdown? Or have you ever experienced anything like this yourself? Now, not everybody goes through the full-on, just crazy time breakdown, but many of us, if not most of us, have gone through what we would consider a bit of a breakdown, like emotionally or mentally at some point in our lives, to the point of, like reality kind of disintegrating a bit for us, where our head is spinning, so to speak. But I really want you to think about this from the most the most intense perspective possible, the most hyperbolic way of thinking about it, like where you see on the movie screen the person who is suddenly in a rage and they're in the other players' faces and they're shaking their fist or they're physically violent, and then like seconds later or minutes later, after that part of themselves has been fully expressed, they break down and they're crying and sad, and they're in the fetal position on the floor. Have you ever seen anything like this? Have you ever experienced anything like this, where you've gone through fits of rage or anger or some level of intense ugliness, some violence within you. And then at some point, that part of you just released and you kind of lost it in a different way. Maybe cried or got sad or felt out of control, if you will. We generally have seen things like this because these are I mean, this is not new. This is like classic to see. This is part of the human condition. Sometimes people express this very outwardly, and again, it's been kind of it's been dramatized, if you will, via a million different stories. But we also see this around us. The other day, I don't know how this stuff gets around, but I was on YouTube and I saw something about somebody on like an American Airlines flight that got kicked off. And so I was like, well, that sounds exciting. And I played it. And you saw someone just totally violent in a rage, screaming at the top of their lungs. And they had to be just carted off by the authorities, right? And then, and of course, once you watch one of these all the way through, then YouTube decides that must be the only thing that you're interested in on earth. So I saw like 20 more of these. I didn't watch all of them, but I watched a couple. They were kind of interesting, kind of exciting. And you saw people going through these types of things. I don't know why everybody does this in an airport. It's like the modern bus station, I guess. But the point of the matter is, maybe it's just like a common public place where there's a lot of smartphone cameras. But people document this on a regular basis. People getting really upset and either really violent or really like breaking down, crying. And then much of the time, I would probably not more than half of the time, but there's quite a few times where you can actually see someone go through this, what I might call a spiral. They will get really upset and angry, and then they will get really sad and powerless and empty, right? Or vice versa. Somebody get really sad, and then somebody tries to like comfort them, and then they get really upset and they are standoffish and violent, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think it's something that we don't have this in common per se, but we have these emotions within us, and we've seen this kind of thing happen. Even if you had to like look at this from like the dramas of seeing somebody who was like had somebody who was a person who turned bad. It's like the series Breaking Bad is a great example of that. Somebody who's supposed to be a really straight-laced, good guy, and all of a sudden he turns into like a supervillain. Or somebody who has kind of an evil twin, like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type of character, right? Where they have this lovely, wonderful, sweet side, and then they have this really, nasty, aggressive side to them, a dark side, if you will. So once again, I'm characterizing this for you so you can get a handle on, the kind of dynamics that happen within someone that gets them to spiral back and forth between different states of mind. And there's absolutely understandable reasons why this happens. It's not just relatively predictable, but it's not a unique pattern whatsoever. And here's the reason why I'm bringing this up is not because these are going to be your clients necessarily, because hopefully that's not the case, but because sometimes people get stuck someplace, not because they are in a rage and not because they're so sad, but because they're bouncing back and forth between different states of mind. And if you could see the exaggerated version of this when somebody's in total freak out mode, you can appreciate those dynamics. If you could get that, the most accelerator, the most intense case of that, most exaggerated case of that, then if you could appreciate that and why that might occur, someone who's operating in a lot more reasonable fashion, somebody who's just quote unquote stuck or scared or frustrated, you can actually get a sense of what makes them actually similar to the ones that are going kind of bonkers and appreciate that they're the same dynamics at work. And I know this might be like, what the heck are you talking about, Sui? And if that's the case, that's totally okay that you're in that place, because I'm going to clear it up as we go through today. Fingers crossed. And I am stretching myself here. This is quite complex. when we try to connect all these dots together. I'm going to do my best to do it for you, and I believe it'll work. So hopefully we'll get through it together here. Let's see. Paco says, 1.5 hours passed. I couldn't remember what happened because I was so stressed in my mind. Yeah, so it's like you were in a radically altered state, right? And there was a part of you that was somehow engaged in one or both of these different states of mind that I'm describing, possibly, and we'll get into more specific cases in a second. And a lot of times we won't remember that fully because it's so intense and it's so out of character for us that we'll go through different phenomenon, different trance phenomenon, like amnesia, or distorting reality, let's say, hearing a voice, right? Like having some kind of hallucination. So all sorts of crazy stuff that can happen. I remember one time, it wasn't like a breakdown, but I just lost my job. In fact, some of you, I've told you about this before when Tony Robbins fired me. And this was like where I was supposed to be working for the rest of my life and I was supposed to be his partner and all these results. And all of a sudden I've been fired from like my mission, right? And I started having these crazy kind of, not visions in my head, but I was scrambling in my mind for what to cling to. I was like, who am I? What is my life about? And I suddenly heard this voice, like kind of just connecting these dots and making me feel kind of like it was going to be okay and all this crazy stuff. And I was like, hey, is that God? I was like, it was this really weird experience, right? It's not like that happens on a regular basis for me, but not that you can't make this kind of stuff up just by imagining it. But people can experience all these very strange, hypnotic, and wacky phenomenon, things that are out of character for us when we go through these kind of experiences. So if your client, here's the point. I'm just going to give you the thesis right up front, and then I'll explain it in more detail. If your client is irrationally stuck or they're crazy, like I just explained, like I just described, they're stuck or crazy. And I don't mean like stuck in terms of logistics, like they're working something out. I mean irrationally stuck. I literally have this written in my notes. If your client is irrationally stuck or crazy, or if they seem to have a dark side, like a part of themselves that comes out every once in a while and does just ridiculous things, like things that are way out of character for the best of who they are, right? They may just be in a spiral between several low levels of consciousness. So they're in a lower level of consciousness because they're irrationally stuck, or they're going crazy, or there's this dark, evil twin of theirs that pops up. And whatever those kind of phenomenon are, and you're just scratching your head like, what the heck is up with this guy or gal or whoever? I've had tons of clients like this. Then they may just be in a spiral between several low levels of consciousness. They're bouncing back and forth at a low level of consciousness, and that is displayed in their emotions, or it's displayed in their stuckness and their irrationality about that, their lack of resourcefulness, if you will. Like somebody who's really naturally fairly resourceful in some context, and all of a sudden they go into this other context, like their health or relationships or money or business or something, and all of a sudden they're like totally unresourceful. They're bouncing around at low levels of consciousness. It's almost guaranteed that that's the case. So, more detail on this. Sometimes people get stuck because they are looping or spiraling between several inelegant states of mind, what you might call levels of consciousness. Is again, like a state of mind, level of consciousness, same kind of thing, right? Like a mode, like a program, like a mindset or a track of their mind. Although these states are generally unproductive, they still meet survival needs. Now, again, if you haven't been in strategy training, you may not know exactly what I mean by survival needs, but kind of try to stay with me here because I can't take all the time to explain that. It'll take a whole nother live stream. So although these states of mind are generally unproductive, they still meet survival needs. But because they don't meet all survival needs, the client loops between other states of mind, between that state of mind and other states of mind, to meet the needs left unmet by the first state. Now, I'll explain this a little bit. I'm going to come back and read this again because, I mean, I know it's a mouthful. So they're in a state of mind. It's a low level of consciousness. It meets a need. That's why they're there. Only reason why we do anything is because we meet our needs by doing it, okay? Then the problem is it doesn't meet all my needs. So it's like I'm being unproductive. It doesn't like make progress for me. It just meets, it's like an addiction, like an addictive place, right? And yet it doesn't support me in everything that I need. So I'll bounce into another state of mind, into another low level of consciousness temporarily to meet that other need. People with like multiple personality disorders, this is like, and I mean, other than the obvious like biochemical or physical abnormalities, which can happen for people, no doubt, this is why they'll do it, you know. They'll go into one personality meets one need, they go into another personality meets another need. You know, and again, people that have that evil twin, those are just multiple personalities. I mean, we may not diagnose them as that, but that's what they're doing. I mean, everybody's got different modes. They got the work mode, they got the, you know, hanging out at home mode, they got the argue with the spouse mode, right? We got all these different modes. And you tell me that you don't have multiple personalities, it's just those crazy people that got it. I don't know about that. For the most part, people have all these different modes that they go into. And yes, they say, oh, well, that's all me. I'm just in a different mood, if you will. The reason why you'll go into those different moods is not just because they take care of business for you and they help you make progress in the world. They may not. Some states of mind suck, but they all meet needs. They all meet survival needs. And it's just they don't meet all the needs, so you got to bounce back and forth between them if you're in a lower level of consciousness that doesn't integrate and meet all your needs. So anyway, they're in this unproductive kind of low-level state, and it doesn't meet all their needs, but it meets some, which is why they're there. And then they'll spiral over, they'll loop over to another state, and that state meets the other needs that aren't currently being met by the current state. And then, of course, because that state of mind doesn't meet all their needs either, then they can't stay there. They got to flip back over to some other state. And so people go back and forth and back and forth. It's like, you know, it's like something circling the drain, you know, in the toilet, right? It feels like getting flushed down a toilet, basically. And that's how it's going to look when you are watching and observing your client's behavior in states of mind, or the way it'll feel and be experienced for you if this is intense enough. Now, for a lot of people, this is not very intense. They've got their lives are so like stable that they'll go through these spiral experiences very slowly. They'll spend a couple weeks in this one state, and then they'll spend a couple weeks in this other state. And they'll go back and forth between these two different states, these two different modes, or three different modes, right? And it's just really slow because for them, their life is a lot more protected, a lot more sequestered, and, you know, a little bit more stable, but it doesn't exactly mean that they're actually producing real progress and real results. Make sense? So I'm going to come back to this statement now that I've explained that a little bit more fleshed out way, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. Once again, sometimes people get stuck because they're looping or spiraling between several inelegant states of mind. Although these states are generally unproductive, they still meet survival needs. But because they don't meet all survival needs for that particular client or for you, the client loops between other states of mind to meet the needs left unmet by the first state. So hopefully that kind of came together a little bit with a little bit more clarity that time. All right, so we had a couple comments here. I have a very driven state, also a very lazy state. Right, so that's actually a pretty good example, Paco. When I'm lazy, I neglect almost everything I take care of. In the driven state, same conversation we had about the slaves overcompensation cycle. Yeah, and actually that overcompensation cycle, the slaves are, we're actually I'm going to show you another version of that. That's kind of part and parcel to what we're talking about here in kind of in a lateral way. I've identified I get lazy until the last minute, and then I go firefighter and get significance off of it. I get certainty and also variety from my lazy social media binging. There you go. So perfect. See how that significance right now, that significant drive that you have that goes into firefighter mode doesn't take care of certainty and variety for you at the level that the laziness does, which is why you got to go back to laziness. And by the way, laziness is not exactly very significant, especially knowing you. So you can't stay there forever. You can't stay lazy forever because, you got to have significance too. So you go back and forth between those two. And you're not even crazy, right? So again, I just shared those kind of crazy examples as exaggerated cases that most of us have universally observed, even if we haven't experienced it for ourselves. So you could get a sense of what the psychology is here. So I'm going to actually show you what this looks like now. And I'm going to give you a much more detailed model of this. So as I mentioned, there's these two different, states of mind, so to speak. Let's say that people go back and forth to. You've got the normal you and you've got your evil twin, right? Or you've got, your wife is nice, your wife is, screaming at you. You get the idea, right? And we go back and forth, bouncing back and forth. And the question is, who's you? Or who's your real spouse, right? And the fact is, this is not a different person. It's the same person with a different state of mind. Okay, so, and this is when we were talking the other day in the training, this is a much more kind of detailed way to put it, if you will. Kind of like a pendulum swinging back and forth. Someone will meet needs in this place, and then they'll slowly feel the need to meet that. Like you can imagine a pendulum swinging. The farther out you swing into, let's say, happy mode, the less you get your needs met by whatever this gets for you. And so it's getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and there's much more, the maximum force on this pendulum is right at the end when the most gravitational pull is pulling it back to center, right? And of course it overcompensates, as we know. So it goes way over here in a really exaggerated fashion. And of course, right at the apex of that pendulum, the most force is exerted and it pulls it back in that direction as well. So as you said, lazy, or, let's say this is happy, lazy Paco, and this is, crazy, mad, significance driven firefighter, right? So we have identities for this. It's like, this is lazy me, this is firefighter me, right? So we've got these personalities that we talk about as to like who we think we are, but it's all us. It's just we've got these forces that work on us called the needs that are pulling us in one direction or another at all times, and these states are not very elegant, and they're also low levels of consciousness. Firefighter might give you significance, but firefighter is a low level of consciousness. Even for an achiever it is. We all have to go into that level of consciousness here and there, maybe once in a blue moon at best, right? But none of us have to stay there, and that's definitely not the greatest expression of who we are. And lazy, social media binging people, right? That's not exactly a very high level of consciousness. It's like an addict, that gets needs met and without taking any risks or doing any real work or really having to have any wisdom about it, right? So they're both low level of consciousness, which is why you go back and forth between them, because neither one of them can really sustain you long term, right? And neither one really fully serves you either, as you've proven. So really great example. I appreciate that one, Paco. But let me give you one more. So this is, sorry, I just wasn't sure which model I was going to share with you. This is what I might call the abuse model. So this is your abuse model. All right, so we have our abuser here in full abuse mode, right? So they start out by punching you and kicking you and hurting you and screaming at you, just so whatever your version of abuse might be, right? And then, of course, for any abuser, eventually, especially if they're abusing somebody that they love, which usually they are, they go into full, so like this is rage mode, let's say. They go into full guilt mode. Should probably draw this in a purple pen. And they're crying and they're sad and they're feeling really, really guilty. right? So this rage fulfilled certain needs, but it was unproductive and it was inelegant, and there were some needs that are not met by going into rage. So what do you do after the rage? After you've satiated your rage, you go into guilt. And it's not like you have to do this and you do it like, it's not like, oh, I got it all out. There's no such thing as getting an emotion out, okay? There's no, like, you don't, like, yes, people can suppress things and not express them, but when you express, like, let's say rage through abusing somebody, you're not like getting the emotion out of you. There's nothing in you, okay? What you're doing is you're satiating your needs. You're filling up, you're not getting something out, you're filling up with a need, right? Rage mode gives somebody massive amounts of significance, right? Gives them a feeling of power, gives them a feeling of importance, like they're proud or special. There's all sorts of things that rage will get somebody. But of course, the problem is it doesn't give you much connection and it's pretty uncertain. So somebody will go into guilt mode to get connection back, and they'll feel sad and they'll connect with themselves emotionally, trying to probably connect with the other person as well. Like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. You get the idea here. And then, of course, as a result of that, there's probably a bunch of promises made. And so then you go into, let's say, pleaser mode. Right? And so pleaser mode, different state of mind, not a mode that can give us great progress, even though it looks like pleaser mode would be a lot more progress. Like that'd be a lot better than rage mode. But frankly, pleaser mode does not work very well either, right? It meets other needs. It probably needs connection to some extent, maybe some variety, where guilt was more about certainty, because this is pretty damn uncertain. Who knows what's going to happen when you're beating each other up? So go into pleaser mode. And, you know, we're probably pretty happy when we're doing it, and we feel connected, and we feel a sense of variety, and we're pleasing. And all of a sudden, something happens, usually, some point during pleaser mode, that will trigger maybe, let's say, a sense of uncertainty or insignificance. So let's say this is rejected. So let's say you're trying to please, and all of a sudden, you're rejected. Right? And so, I don't know, probably not the best way to describe rejected, but, you know, so you're surprised, you're jilted, you're rejected, something's going on in pleaser mode where suddenly you feel like connected and you feel a variety, but you feel like insignificant or you feel uncertain. And so guess what gets triggered as a result of that? When you go into rejected mode, it triggers another rage. And then, of course, we go into enough of a rage, we satiate that rage, we go into guilt. We satiate that guilt, we go into pleaser, satiate that pleaser mode. Eventually, we'll probably end up feeling rejected or something that sometimes you even shortcut this and you go right back to rage, right? But the point being, yes, there are triggers along the way. There are some outside influences here, probably. But can somebody do this by themselves? Yes or no? Can somebody, resentment could be over here, like I'm just, because I please this, that's probably better than the one I came up with. You know, more resentful. Because I've been pleasing you, and I'm doing everything, and it's still not good enough. Resentment, right? And then, of course, that eventually kites up into rage. Resentful is probably somewhat over here. That's almost more of a shortcut, so to speak, right? But these all meet needs. They just don't meet all the needs. And yes, people could get triggered, like I said, but people can, by themselves, go through these different states of mind. That's why they give you the padded room when you're going nuts, you know, because you go into rage and you're banging your head into the wall, then you're curled up on the floor, you know, feeling stupid, and, you know, then you're manic and jumping up and down and I mean, it's like stuff happens with people, right? And they don't necessarily need triggers, because frankly, we trigger ourselves, and the way we trigger ourselves is, like I said, like in that pendulum, we trigger the fact that this is a low level of consciousness and it doesn't meet all your needs, eventually really meeting the needs that are the only needs that it can meet at really high levels, satiating those, like getting full up from a meal. Eventually, you're like, I want something else, and you go to the next one and go to the next one and go to the next one and go to the next one. It's like, I'm burnt out. I want something else. I think I'll be lazy and hang out and watch Netflix, right? And after a while, after 3 days of doing that, you're like, oh, I feel like a slug. I feel like a loser. I feel like an idiot. I don't need to watch anymore. I've seen enough of this stuff. I want something new. I'm going to go work really hard. You go back and forth between these two different states of mind, right? This is the pendulum that's swinging. Our need for something else calls to us because we're not meeting it in this inelegant state. And we are meeting some things, but we're so satiated there, we start to take those needs for granted, and we're pulled even more by the other state. So we get pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled by these different, very abusive motivations. That's why we call this abuse model, because this is what your client is doing all the time. They may not be abusing their spouse or abusing their kids, but in some way they're abusing themselves by staying what they will call stuck and what I would call a spiral. And it's like, can you imagine, like, where is this really going, this whole game? Like, where is this going? The answer is very simple, actually. The answer is this is going nowhere, right? This is going exactly nowhere. This relationship is like nothing's ever going to happen like good. There's no progress in this relationship. Maybe somebody will eventually like wake up and end it, right? But if this was like your work, or this is like your health, or whatever, right? Whatever these things are that makes like this kind of spiral in whatever part of your wheel of life you're in that this applies to, this is going nowhere. This is the road to nowhere. This is the endless circle, right? There's a circular nature to this. You get that? And so that's why you'll call it stuck. But you're not stuck. You're actually moving and moving and moving. You're just moving around. It's like if I was walking around the same circle again and again and again and again and again, like there's actually a lot of movement here. I'm just not actually getting anywhere. That's what we're talking about here. That's it. So that's just one like way to look at it. Let me give you the technicalities now. I'm just reading comments as I rip here. Needs will be met regardless of who's around. Sure, yeah, exactly. That happens spot on. After working real hard, I feel like relaxing, but I'm not tired. I can finally say, right, yeah, it's not like you're burnt out. Like, it's not like you can't work anymore. Psychologically, you've thrown the pendulum in such a hyper significant direction. It's like, you're significant now. You don't need any more of that significance, but maybe I can go connect. Or maybe I can go get some variety, right? Or maybe I can go relax and feel comfortable for once, because that overwork thing, like that's not comfortable stuff, right? So you go back and forth between those states. So this is what my mentor, Tony Robbins, used to call a crazy eight. And it's basically describing what I just showed you. And for those of you in strategy training, you're going to know this through the survival needs and the different states. So the basic model here is that everybody goes into states of mind, not because somebody got depressed or got angry. You don't catch it like a virus. It's not an object that fell on you out of the sky. Somebody triggered you. You do your own states. But why we would go into one state versus another is not because it's a conscious choice, but because those states of mind meet survival needs. It's the only reason why we'll go into any particular state. They're like ways that we can fulfill on the addiction to these needs that we have to meet, so to speak. So people will go into, like I showed you before, they'll go into anger or frustration or rage. And this is a state that's quite powerful, actually. It gets a lot done. It's a state of action and energy, gives you control, makes you feel powerful, right? So there's actually benefits to these types of even negative, angry, frustrated states. And the needs that are met in this kind of where the pendulum goes over to this extreme is significance and certainty. If I get really, really mad, I feel powerful. I feel strong. I feel significant. Like nobody can stop me. And I'm certain because I know I'm in control, right? Frustration, similar, maybe not as intense. Rage, even more intense. But you take action when you're in these states, right? It gives you energy. It'll put you in control. It creates power for you. It's like one of my clients used to say, it's like jet fuel. It gets me off my butt, right? This stuff, this is a highly motivated person. Maybe not somebody you want to hang out with, but it's somebody who's pretty motivated, right? So as I mentioned, once you satiate that significance and certainty enough through these kind of very low level of consciousness states, eventually you're going to feel a missing piece in you that we all have called connection and variety. Or at least connection. Sometimes variety is not one of those. Because here, this is like the same thing over and over again. You might get variety through that, but not necessarily. At least we know you'll get certainty. So once this has been satiated, it's like, I don't need this anymore, but this stuff I need real bad, and I don't have any of it in this state over here. So someone will suddenly break down crying, or they'll just let go and get depressed and collapse. Will kind of curl up in a psychological ball, so to speak, and everything just releases and they droop. And this is like a powerless, low energy, almost like worthless state. Like, forget it. I give up. And you just let go in that place. So then we throw the pendulum over in this direction in the crazy 8, and the needs met by being sad and sorry and depressed are things like connection. Because when you get depressed, you connect with yourself. You feel all your depressed feelings. When you're sad, you feel connection with yourself because you take the time. This is not a lot of movements happening over here. You don't have a lot of time to connect with yourself over here. You're in action. You're in control. You've got a lot of energy. This is a low energy place. This is when you can really take the time and give yourself time to feel. So you connect with yourself at least. By the way, if you're sad, sorry, and depressed enough, usually other people want to connect with you. They're like, oh, it's okay. It's okay, I'll give you a hug. It'll be all right. It attracts a certain amount of attention, if not some connection from other people. People feel sorry for you after a while, right? But it comes with a lot of fallout, feeling worthless, feeling lost or being lost, feeling crazy. This whole thing looks pretty crazy to me. But the point of the matter is this is not a high level of consciousness here to be sad, sorry, and depressed. But these experiences meet at least connection, if not some variety, especially if you spent time in these states. So after a while, if you throw the pendulum far enough in that direction, these states get satiated. And guess what? Now you don't have any significance, and you will go right back into it. And you will back and forth and back and forth. And you wonder why you can't get anywhere like this, because there's no progress here. Now, people feel this, and they know intuitively, even if they're not conscious of it, that they ain't getting anywhere, right? So what'll happen is people will try to exit from this crazy 8. And usually the way people do this is typical, and you'll see this in your clients, is they'll exit the crazy 8 going down. So think of this as like an exit. It's like an escape. It's like like the emergency, release, if you will, ejection. And they'll exit through like drugs or, drinking or some other type of like binge behavior, right? They'll go party. They'll indulge in something, right? Like TV, sex, just whatever, whatever your indulgences are, whatever your drugs are, whatever the things are that kind of give you immediate gratification without any work on your part, without any risk on your part, without, different things for different people, right? But they'll eject going down, or this is a big one for the West, food. So it's like, oh, I'm going back and forth and back and forth. This is horrible, horrible, horrible. I'm going to go eat something, right? And because when you're eating, you can't get that depressed, or you could eat while you're depressed, I guess. But when you're eating, you got to slow down enough to get out of this rage kind of place, right? So, and that'll change your state because it'll distract you, right? Any distractions would be on this list as well. So distractions. This is the usual stuff. Sometimes people will do this through more productive ways, like let's say work. They'll use work like a drug. That says walk, but whatever. So all sorts of different things that we'll use as drugs or actual drugs, things that are, illicit activities, let's say, things that are not healthy for us long term, in order to eject ourselves from this craziness, because we know this is crazy. But you can't stay on these that long either, so then you end up going back into this mode. Now, the ideal is rather than spiraling down into drugs that distract you or, drug your brain out of this. Because some people just like smoke marijuana, not because it's like medicinal for them, because it kills this off. I mean, that's why they call it stoned, because that's like what you are. It's like you just kill all your experiences, just numb yourself, right? So it's hard to feel, depressed or, rage and anger when you're stoned out of your mind, right? It's kind of hard to do that. So it's like, oh, I'm getting too crazy. I had a friend once, we played in a band together, imagine that, somebody who plays in the band that smokes. And he would get really agitated. He'd get really like nervous and anxious after like a couple days of not, going and hitting the marijuana, right? And it's like it's an addiction for him. But it would eject him out of his highly agitated rage or frustration, or he had anxiety. So, I mean, by the way, could you have like anxiety versus, like somebody who's manic or something like that? Sure. So these aren't the only two things that people can go back and forth on like a crazy eight. There's all sorts of other ones, right? So he'd get out of anxiety by going down, by spiraling down. So what you're really after here, and the goal between you and your client may not share this with you initially, is that you want to help your client, or you, if this is your situation, is you want to exit going up. You want to raise your level of consciousness to another level that goes above and beyond this, into states of mind that are beyond like sadness and anger, into something that would, like let's say joy, or let's say love, or understanding. I mean, you could get the idea. There's all sorts of states of mind that are way beyond these very unproductive, inelegant, and yet addictive states of mind, right? So we want to go up a level rather than using some kind of indulgence to hurt ourselves even more, but eject ourselves out of this. That's not the norm. So the point with all this is that this is the simplest form of spiral. And most of your clients are going to have something like this that they go through. And it might not be easy to detect it because they may not be as intense as the one flew over the cuckoo's nest type of craziness. Okay. So you got to be really sensitive to where they go and where they say they're stuck, and you got to dig in and dig deep for what are the states of mind that they go into that keep them from taking the actions they need to take, that keep them from performing they need to perform, and on and on and on. So that's the start of this. Now, we already talked about this pendulum metaphor here. This is the same thing. It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth. We just call it a crazy eight because it's like crazy, basically. Let me share with you an example of this. I had a friend, and it's just an amazing person. And one day, this was like 18 years ago, when I first was starting my coaching business, just starting to partner with people. He came up to me and he said, "You know what? I'm really having trouble." Like, he was a salesperson. He's like, "I'm not making enough sales. I'm like the life of the party, and yet." It's like, if I make sales, I have to be the guy that's trying to take. I have to just say, look, this is the way it is. You need to buy, and I got to kind of get tough with people. And he's like, I don't like that. I mean, I can do it. I have it within me. I have the capability to do it, but that's just not me. It's like I can either like have a big party and just have a lot of fun and make no money, or I could go make a ton of money, and but I'm no fun. Like, nobody likes me when I'm making a ton of money. And I said, you know what, Noah, it's interesting. You have these two different personas, these two different personalities. I wonder what it would be like if you were able to experience both of them simultaneously. I wonder if you could be super productive and sell while you're still having fun and being friendly. I wonder if you could enjoy your life while you move forward and made amazing things happen. I wonder what it would be feeling like for you, or what you would feel like if you could experience both of those things simultaneously. And he like defocused his eyes and he's kind of going cross-eyed and he's thinking, he's going like this, you know, and he's like, yeah, yeah, I don't know what that would be like. And I was like, well, can you imagine it? You know, I'm trying to egg him on, right? Kind of give him to move up in this states of mind rather than going back and forth and back and forth. And he starts to imagine. He's like, yeah, I think I'm gonna do that. And he just walks off. A couple months later, he rang me up, or we somehow we saw each other at some event, and he's like, Jeff, let me tell you, I don't remember what you told me. I don't know, remember what you said or what your coaching was, but you like totally changed me. Like I'm making like 20,000 a month right now. I'm at a whole nother level. I'm at an amazing time doing it. I'm like I don't do whatever you did with me like that. It was amazing, right? And, it was like a 5-10 minute conversation, right? But this is what it was. I took these two inelegant states, and obviously it wasn't these two. It was like, party versus work, right? And I just smashed them together into somebody who had mastery over both, right? Now, obviously it wasn't joy and love, but you get the idea, right? So he had risen up to another level, somebody who could be productive and have a good time at the same time. And all of a sudden he didn't have to, like you were talking about, Paco, distract himself with, at the time, there was no social media at the time, but, with other things, right? With going to the next party. But he also didn't have to he didn't just have to work and work and work to satiate his need for significance. He could balance both of them because he brought the best of both of those states of mind together in himself simultaneously, because they were both him. So this is a problem that we're dealing with here, but there's also a huge opportunity for what you do with your clients and for yourself. Because as I'm going to read my notes here, your client is at a set level of consciousness, wherever they are, and they can free themselves even further by awakening to a higher consciousness. They can free themselves by awakening to a higher consciousness, as I just kind of described, so to speak. So although them inventing a new state to manage themselves at this level can be freeing and offer value unto itself, like I just described, like having this new state of mind, you can also open the door to the ultimate freedom for your client when your client sees the next level of consciousness that's directly above wherever they're at currently. This exchanges the spiral that goes nowhere, like we're showing here, or worse, down, because they can't do anything else to eject themselves out of it, to an upward spiral of awakening. So rather than going asleep even more and numbing yourself even more, you can awaken even more. You can have an upward spiral of awakening out of a crazy eight, out of a spiral where you're stuck. So let me show you what that looks like. And this is the more advanced version of what we just talked about here. So this is Graves' model of spiral dynamics. And one of the things you're going to notice is that there's still a spiral here. We still got this back and forthness to the psychology here. And at the same time, we have different states of mind that are typical at the extremes of these different sides of the spiral. But just like in a crazy eight, there are, the lower levels of consciousness only meet certain needs, and they're unproductive in a variety of ways. And I'm going to describe that with you as I go, and then we'll talk about some of the other, well, actually, let's talk about it now. So you can go to a higher level of consciousness or a lower level of consciousness. These are layers and levels that are available to all of us, where we can spiral up and spiral down. What will happen for most people is they'll spiral between 2 or 3 of these levels of consciousness, and they'll bounce like from 2 to 3 to 4, and then back down to 2, let's say, right? So they won't go any higher because that's just like something that they haven't made available to them, right? So your job is to make the next level available to them and demonstrate it and support them in being inspired to raise their level of consciousness, not just change their state of mind and avoid the numbness of the drug or the thing that they use to distract themselves from this inopportune and inelegant way of operating. So now, think of this as a maturing process, or a process of getting wiser and wiser, if you will, raising your level. Everybody pretty much starts egocentric, at least when we're babies. We try to get our own needs met, and everything's about me, me, me. We don't get what we want, we basically cry. Then we move up eventually, if we mature in our life, to ethnocentric. We start to worry about how other people, like mom and dad, feel about us. We start to cater to others. We become pleasers, or we become friendlier in some way, and we stop being so selfish, right? And eventually, if we really gravitate to the next level, very few people do this, we eventually become more world-centric. Like, we don't just care about the people that can give us pleasure and pain. We care about the world. We care about the entire world. So I'll just describe this in, those of you that have access to the DVD course, this is in the DVD course. Higher purpose and higher consciousness. Help your client identify a higher purpose or level of consciousness for themselves. Higher purpose or level of consciousness simply means a purpose or level of consciousness that has an impact beyond themselves. These lower levels, these first three, the only people that they impact in a positive way is you. They're completely self-centered. So all clients start out as egocentric in life, but to grow, they must exceed that egocentric level of thought, or that egocentric consciousness, and start caring about more than just themselves. Think of these levels of consciousness as if they're like rungs on a ladder, so to speak, or levels of consciousness. So like in these low levels, client cares only about themselves, and then eventually they start caring about themselves and people around them who have the power to help or hurt them. They care about themselves and people similar to them. They care about themselves and people in their country or culture or religion. And eventually, they just care about all people, no matter what. They care about everything in the universe, so to speak. Maybe not even just people, right? That's kind of the progression, if you will. So as it says in my DVD course, once you've identified your client's current level of consciousness and the next specific level for them, whatever the next level is, simply help them with strategies to move them from where they currently are to those higher levels of consciousness. Abracadabra. Great. So, so let's just go through these. So we start with like the very base level called survival, right? And this is that first lowest level of consciousness, totally egocentric. They even color this beige in the models. This is where you or your client are totally dependent on others in order to survive. Just like you just take from others to get what you need to survive, right? The focus here is just staying alive, and that's it. By the way, what need is this level all about? It's all about certainty. It's all about control. It's all about predictability. It's all about keeping your certainty. Now, eventually, of course, we gravitate up to, well, another level, and this is a level that we call tribal. It's kind of like, remember when you were a kid, you had like an imaginary friend, and you and your friends, you had these like rituals that you would practice, these games you'd play over and over and over again. I know my daughter, like when she was young, and she still does this sometimes, we like show her a movie and she's like, I want to watch that movie. I want to watch that movie. She just does the same ritual again and again and again. It's like a tribal mindset, if you will. And some adults stay in this place. You can go out to the tribes in Borneo or something, and they basically, like, they have their rituals and they do everything the same because they're just kind of still trying to survive. So the tribal mindset is still about meeting certainty, but they're also connected with each other. So now it's like interdependent certainty and survival. So we color this purple, so to speak. Think of it as like this dark but connected world. And the focus is, again, safety and security. Not just survival, but just trying to stay secure, so to speak. Somebody that just needs you, and they're just there to kind of keep the family unit together and the tribe together. Does that make sense? It's a very, and by the way, our Western culture has become very tribal. If you notice that the teams on our different parts of like the political spectrum, like not everybody's a part of this, but those that are, they cling to each other. They cling to their ideas. Do you see how rigid they are? This is a very rigid way of being. It's just all these rituals and tribal customs and flags that we wave. There's a lot of like controlling symbols in the tribe, so to speak. Now, if somebody gravitates to the next level, they usually want more than just certainty and connection. They want significance. And so remember we were talking about spiraling over to significance? Well, this next level, this third level of consciousness is called, we call this red or power god. It's like somebody who's all about like me, but not like from a survival perspective, from like I want to become the god perspective. Like from the perspective of I want to last forever. I want to be everything to all people, right? The king or queen, you know, the emperor, you know, the warlord, if you will. There are some tribal societies, like you go to look at the Middle East, there are warlords that run the show, and they're the power gods, and everybody beneath them are tribal in nature. They follow the power gods around because the power gods provide protection for those that need certainty and connection. And they connect with each other, and then the power god just lords over everybody. This is not exactly a unique model in our society. It does happen from time to time. Cults are like this. Like you see, we talked about Heaven's Gate the other day. A lot of cults where there's one power god at the head of the cult, right? One titular head of everything that lords over everyone, and everybody just caters to them because they're all significant, all powerful, but they're a tribe. Everybody underneath them are a tribe who are just there to connect with each other. They're just trying to get these needs met, basically. And they give up their significance to this other person so they can just have safety and kind of connect with each other a little bit, feel like belong to something like a cult, if you will. So that's the power god level. They live in anger. They're all about escaping control, the control of the tribal society, so to speak. They're focused on power and action. This sounding familiar? There's a lot of people in our society that are in the power god level. They'll go rage. They'll go into significant feats of dominating everyone around them. And if you haven't gone into this, you probably met people like this at one point or another in your life. I know I have. They were not fun experiences. Now, eventually, somebody gets tired of just being about me all the time, and they want something beyond their life. And so they'll usually gravitate towards this fourth level of consciousness. We color it blue because it's like true blue, because it's like rules driven. It's like, I don't want to just be driven by my own selfish wants and needs, because this is pretty crazy, right? One moment you need this, one moment you need that. You're in the prison of your own craziness in the power god world. So usually power gods, if they can mature to this level, a lot of them don't, will go up to more of a conform or die kind of place, where it's maybe organized religions are in this place. Not all, but many who have tremendous dogma and rules. Also certain societies where it's like, if you steal the bread, you get your arm cut off, right? Those like conform or die kind of things. Follow the rules or you get massive pain. That's blue. So this is a level of consciousness where the core values are justice and morality. It's all about giving it up for like a greater ruler or a greater rule, so to speak. Not the way tribal does, because these guys they don't have anything beyond them. These more rule-driven have significance by following the dogma until death, so to speak, and have their life be about more than just serving their own needs, right? This is, by the way, where we start to become ethnocentric, because we're serving more by following these rules, because usually the rules serve society or serve the country or serve the religion, because you're giving to them in some way, right? So this is more about certainty, though, and about significance beyond yourself, so to speak, beyond your life, beyond your own egocentric needs, if you will. So this is right where we start to hit the tipping point to more ethnocentric levels of consciousness, where we then move over to level 5, which we color orange. And think of this as like the achiever world. So we go beyond the rules. We break free from the rules this time, but not by being a selfish little nut, but by being an achiever, by having it be more than just about us, but achieving really important things that we strive for, that we drive for. And this achiever level is much more around being a good manager, not dominating and abusing other people, but sharing with people enough such that you can pull them along with you. So it's a much higher level of consciousness than power god. But notice how both of these carry significance with them. So there's like significance up and down this chain, and then connection up and down this chain, and certainty are kind of at one side of the spiral or another. So we can see there's a flavor. Do you tend to spiral towards things that are over here? So it's connection and certainty. Or do you tend to spiral towards things that are over here, consciousness levels that are over here, more significance oriented? And there's some variety in the achiever, because when you achieve enough, you have a lot of variety you can achieve, right? So striver, driver, achiever, success and achievement is the focus here. This is all about material gain, gaining an advantage, competing, but not in a way like where you're killing your competition. You're just winning the game, if you will, with your team. So this is a team player over here, because now you're ethnocentric. Here, you're totally egocentric in Power God land. Now, another level beyond this of consciousness, going beyond our kind of capitalist mores, if you will, would maybe be going over to more of a green type of approach, socially conscious, if you will. So if you're socially conscious, this is a 6th level of consciousness up, you're more into fairness and equality. Connection is the need that's served greatly, and again, it's very ethnocentric. It's about sharing and fairness, things like that. Community and harmony are a big part of this aspect over here. So it's kind of raising the level. Now it's not just about achieving what you want with your team. It's about making sure that your society is fair for everyone and that everybody's served, even the ones that aren't just on your team. So now we're more connected with people, and we're more driven by connection in that level of consciousness. Finally, we move up beyond that to a level called integrated. And this is yellow. I didn't have yellow, so I just colored it orange again. But think about the integrated level of consciousness as being world-centric, because it appreciates every level of consciousness below it equally. It doesn't over or undervalue any of them. If you're in any of these levels of consciousness on their own, you tend to be biased towards that level of consciousness. So I'm just about the rules and that's it, because you were a drunk before and now you go to AA and you follow the 12 steps to the letter and you go to church every Sunday, and it's everything is dogma and rules and rules and rules, or you're getting massive pain, right? Or you are just tribal, or you're just power god and you beat everybody up, right? But integrated says, hey, there's something valuable in every one of these types. In every one of these layers of consciousness, everybody needs to be a power god once in a while. Everybody needs to follow rules and dogma every once in a while, right? So there's all sorts of different situations where this might be needed at this moment, right? So integrated appreciates that and understands that. So it's connected with all of these equally, and then there's variety because you can flow between any of these levels of consciousness when you're that integrated level. So we call this flex flow or integrated. They focus on the bigger picture. And this is where we start to get even more like spirit centric when we go up to the next level, level 8, which is it's like turquoise color. I didn't have turquoise in my markers. But this is where you're focused on pure connection with everything in the world and the universe, oneness, so to speak. It's a spiritual level. And this level seeks spirituality and unity. And think of it as like almost like divorce from the other levels, where it appreciates the levels like integrated, but it's not any of the levels. It's like otherworldly, if you will. Does that make sense? It's a little odd. I mean, this gets pretty esoteric at the top, right? But the point of all of this is that we can have a center of gravity. So think about what your center of gravity is, or what your client's center of gravity is. Where do they fall on this spectrum, right? And then what are the levels directly above and below that center of gravity? Because almost guaranteed, very likely, that if somebody's really rules driven, every once in a while they might go achieve some things. They might gravitate up a level and like have some new achievements out of their AA meetings, let's say. Or they might end up sometimes spiraling down, like their rules. They get tired of those rules. They want to just be a crazy drunk every once in a while, and they go on a binge, right? So their center of gravity might be here, but they usually will have some next door neighbors that they kind of ratchet up and down to. Does that make sense? Now, sometimes somebody can actually go directly down or directly up without spiraling at all. This is not necessarily more elegant, but it keeps them on one side of the spectrum, if you will. Like I know somebody right now we're working with who's really socially conscious, but ever since she quit her job, she's gone way down to tribal, and she spends a lot of time in rules as well, dogma, and she's stuck in the dogma that she learned while she was socially conscious, but she's not in that world anymore. She needs to go achieve some things, but she hasn't been willing to go into that realm at this point. So she stays kind of biased on this side. So notice where your client's biases are. Notice where they spiral to and from, and what emotions are dominating that. And then also note what needs are at stake in whatever the levels are. So like Paco just said, he's in 5 and 6, right? So if you're 5 and 6, you go back and forth between achiever and socially conscious. You go back and forth between significance and variety and probably connection at some level. Now those are a lot more elegant than the ones below them, as you might imagine, right? But there's other levels where you might need to integrate so you can go spiral in all these different directions without necessarily letting those own you at the time that they're needed, let's say, right? But you can see how you meet a lot of needs by going back and forth between those, but you still got to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? It's possible you haven't finished the achiever process, Paco, as we've discussed already. And if you go full achiever, that might feel like you're spiraling downward for a while, right? A lot of coaches have skipped orange and they went straight from like purple or blue to green to socially conscious. And there's some experience in the achiever world, in the striver-driver achiever world, that they missed, let's say. And so a lot of times if your client fully satiates the level that they're at or the level that they might have skipped, and they really crush it in that level and do that level really well, then they become even more ready for the level above it. Sometimes that's not the case, but sometimes it very much is. So think from this perspective first. I'll give you one more explanation of like how this is manifested with clients I've worked with. There's a client that I've been working with for years now. And when I first started working with her, her boss complained that she was a really high performer. She was an achiever, but every once in a while when they were at a meeting or something, she would just rage on them. She would go down to power God. She would just go off the handle, and she would like at meetings, they would go out to dinner and she'd start drinking, and then she'd get a little drunk, and then she would just start flipping out on everybody, and it would just totally alienate the entire team, right? But she was a real achiever as well. So she was spiraling between these very significance-driven states, right? And so after a while, I've been coaching her, and we found that one of the things that she had been doing for quite a long time was smoking. Remember what we talked about when we talked about those crazy eights? People will use a drug to distract themselves from a spiral that they go around in. So she was probably spiraling somewhere between, tribal and power. Because she's probably between 2 and 3. Because I remember her telling me, I get really mad, but then I get scared. I get scared that I'm going to get fired. So go back and forth. And that scared is not rules. Rules is like you have to do things a certain way or you die. Scared is more like tribal. So she's probably moving between 3 and 2. I wasn't thinking about this at the time. So after a while, we started working on her seeing the higher parts of herself, the achiever part, the socially conscious part that felt fairness was important, and integrating those into the whole her and helping her feel the best parts of herself, kind of like what I was talking about with Noah just a second ago. And she experienced these things. She experienced these new states of mind. They gave her access to higher levels of consciousness. And then one day she said, Jeff, I decided I need to quit smoking. Out of the blue. Like I never pushed her for this or anything. She just decided. And she quit smoking. And then a year later, she is a whole different person. She sees when she's being petty now. She still has a power god in her, no doubt. But she sees that and she stays in achievement mode or in socially conscious mode instead of spiraling down now. She follows rules around not smoking, even though she really wants a cigarette as well. So she probably had skipped the rules portion because this woman was an achiever, but she would spiral down into rage and into fear, right? So think of it like this is the constellation, right? And so once she found some rules for herself that were absolutely required for her to not smoke, right? Totally important for her. she was able to move back up permanently to achiever and socially conscious with very little spiraling down, right? Now, just the other day, she told me, you know what? I want to lose 50 pounds. And she went to Weight Watchers. She's already lost a ton. And she's just taking care of herself even more. So she's getting even more for herself as a socially conscious achiever than she ever did as a power god tribal who would exit going down into survival mode, right? And I think the way that she did it is through like things like Weight Watchers and different programs that gave her rules to live by, so that she got the missing, kind of this missing piece. I didn't think about this at the time. I just provided her transformational coaching. And so by following those rules, she's able to move back up because she doesn't have to exit out her crazy eight on a regular basis. And now she's working on who she's becoming in her purpose in life, long-term financial success. She's still between 5 and 6. And at some point, she's going to integrate all these parts of herself. Does that make sense? It was really, really interesting how the one missing consciousness that she had on her kind of card, if you will, if I had looked at it at the time, was the piece that she got while she gravitated away from the drugs and away from the distractions and away from these things that would help her numb herself out of these lower levels of consciousness. And the day that I actually got her to see her pettiness, i.e. her power god, and she can own that and appreciate, hey, sometimes the petty part of me comes out and I just see that part for who she is, which is a little girl that just wants to throw a tantrum. I never have to be her anymore. Different level of consciousness, new level of wisdom. And her boss now tells me she's a completely different person. Like, she's still her, but she's a more mature version of her than I've ever seen before. How's that for getting what you're worth, getting what your fee was that you charged? So the boss is happy, client is happy, everybody's happy as a result. So here's your how-to directions for the day. Assign the levels of consciousness and or the survival needs and states that you or your client, if you're working with a client, are going into on a regular basis, habitually. Track where they spiral to, like I just talked about, and what the triggers are for those spiraling one direction or another. How do they get out of their crazy eights? Do they eject going up and go to the next level, or do they drug themselves into submission and get out of it going downward? Okay? Or they go down, spiral down in lower levels of consciousness. Then think about either combining multiple states that they're in so they can get the best of both worlds simultaneously, or these different identities, if you will, so they can meet all their needs at once, so they don't need to spiral like this in very inelegant ways, and also eventually bring them to the next immediate level of consciousness above their current highest. Or if you feel they've skipped some levels or a level of consciousness, like they just spiral one side or the other, or they're posturing one level of consciousness, but they're really at a lower one, then help them to buy into, to spend time in, to cultivate that level of consciousness, whatever it is for them, so they can master that part of themselves, so they don't just try to skip it. Very seldom, if ever, do people skip levels of consciousness and just go straight up to spiritual. Now, a lot of people act like they are, right? A lot of people play that game, wave the banner of being super spiritual. Of course, there's now people that make fun of those individuals on a regular basis. But the point being, people have a ladder to climb here. And a lot of times they haven't completely learned the lessons that are below what they posture to be. So those are your assignments. Share this with somebody who could use that, especially if you're working with a client who needs this model for themselves in a simple enough way such that they can kind of get through it in one sitting, so you can work with them on it. But also for other leaders, managers, coaches that this would make a difference for them to see the craziness of humanity, the weird things that their clients do, or that their team does, or that they themselves or their family does, in a way that's explainable, understandable, and actually there's workability in appreciating where someone is and where they need to go, assuming they have any coaching or management or people skills whatsoever. If nothing else, so they can make a difference for themselves. Also, if you want to see more of these, the best way to do that is go to the YouTube channel and subscribe, hit the bell. The other way also, it would be to like wherever you are like the Facebook video, like the YouTube video, because that does two things. Number one is it makes sure that that algorithm knows that you probably want to see more of this. Second, it also will reach out to people that maybe are like you, because they nowadays AI can kind of tell the kind of person you are by keeping all this data on you, and find other people that might be similar to you that this is exactly what they needed at the time. And that's a great gift that we can give the world if you're willing to partner with me on that level of consciousness, to be socially conscious enough to share it with people and have a spiritual connection with people that you don't even know, if you will. So hope that made a difference. Couple comments here. Okay, I have the power God state showing up every now and then. Yeah, I could gather knowing your profile, Paco, especially when I've accumulated enough negative experiences, resentment, frustration. Yeah, totally. I can see that. I see the power God coming instead of getting rid of it, embody it stubbornly, can consciously see how it doesn't serve me and still do it for a short period. Yeah, you're going to need to do that sometimes just to make something happen, right? Because that's an active state. And also there are going to be some rules areas for you that will help you exit from that, and the achiever area that you need to completely embody that you've not yet fully embodied to, so that you can own the socially conscious part of you. So you're kind of in this triad here. So you can see what the lowest level is and what the highest level is, and you'll need all of those. Those aren't your enemies. They're not like worse or bad. They're all our friends that we can use when we need to, because we're all integrated ultimately. We're just not necessarily acting that way yet. So really, really great. Great points. And I'll talk to you in the next Strategy Immersion Training live stream very soon. Take care. Until then.